Have you ever watched a race and thought, wait, they're allowed to do that? Well, here's the thing. A lot of what you see in modern motorsport is tightly controlled, regulated down to the millimeter. But rewind a few decades, and racing was basically the Wild West. Engineers were pulling stunts that would get you banned for life today, but back then, totally fine. Some of these modifications were genius. Some were terrifying. And all of them helped shape the rules we have now. Today, we're counting down 20 racing modifications that are completely illegal now, but were perfectly normal back in the day. If you're a fan of speed, engineering, and a little bit of madness, go ahead and hit like and subscribe, and let's get into it. Number 20. Leaded racing fuel. For most of motorsport history, leaded gasoline was not just allowed, it was the standard. Every race car from Formula One to NASCAR to Le Mans ran on fuel loaded with tetraethyl lead, an additive that boosted octane ratings and helped prevent engine knock in high-compression engines. It was a critical performance ingredient. Lead allowed teams to push compression ratios higher, which meant more power. And nobody questioned it because, well, everyone was using it. The problem, of course, was that lead is incredibly toxic. The fumes coming off those exhaust pipes were poisoning not just the mechanics in the pits, but the spectators in the grandstands. When engine builders first heard about switching to unleaded, they panicked. Lead provided natural lubrication for valve seats, and without it, engines would eat themselves alive. It took advances in valve coating technology and years of dynamometer testing to develop an unleaded blend that wouldn't destroy their high-performance engines. NASCAR was one of the last major series to switch, finally mandating unleaded fuel in 2007 after partnering with Sunoco to create Sunoco 260 GTX, a specially formulated blend. Formula One made the switch earlier, banning leaded fuel in the 1990s as part of a broader push to make racing fuel more similar to what consumers actually put in their cars. Today, the idea of running leaded fuel at a racetrack is unthinkable, but for decades it was as normal as putting tires on the car. Number 19. Unlimited turbo boost in rally. In 1982, the FIA introduced Group B regulations for the World Rally Championship, and it basically told manufacturers to go nuts. The rules required just 200 road-going versions of a car for homologation, and crucially, there were no restrictions on turbo boost pressure. None. Zero. Engineers treated this like a blank check. By 1986, cars like the Audi Quattro S 1E2 and the Lancia Delta S4 were producing over 500 horsepower from tiny turbocharged engines accelerating from 0 to 60 in under 3 seconds on gravel roads. The power nearly doubled in just 4 years, but the cars became monsters that exceeded the capabilities of the roads, the safety systems, and sometimes even the drivers. After the deaths of Henri Toivonen and his co-driver Sergio Cresto during the 1986 Tour de Corse, Group B was banned entirely. Today, rally cars run with intake restrictors that cap power output. Unlimited boost is a relic of an era that was spectacular and tragic in equal measure. Number 18. Fan cars. In 1978, Brabham designer Gordon Murray unveiled one of the most audacious machines in Formula One history, the BT-46B, better known as the fan car. The concept was deceptively simple. A large fan mounted at the rear of the car sucked air out from underneath, creating a massive low-pressure zone that effectively glued the car to the track. Murray cleverly claimed the fan was primarily for engine cooling, exploiting a loophole in the rules that said any aerodynamic device had to be fixed and stationary, but said nothing about cooling devices. Niki Lauda drove it in its only race, the 1978 Swedish Grand Prix, and won easily after deliberately qualifying third to avoid drawing too much attention to how fast the car really was. The other teams were furious. The fan created incredible downforce regardless of speed, meaning the car had phenomenal grip even at low velocities where normal wings and aerodynamic surfaces were essentially useless. There were also complaints that the fan threw debris into the faces of following drivers, creating a safety hazard. Brabham boss Bernie Ecclestone, ever the politician, quietly retired the car rather than fight a legal battle. The fan car concept was immediately banned, but its single victorious race remains one of the most legendary performances in the sport's entire history. Number 17. Six-wheeled racing cars. In 1976, Tyrrell showed up to the Formula One grid with something nobody had ever seen before, a car with 6 wheels. The P34 replaced the standard 2 front wheels with 4 smaller ones, each just 10 inches in diameter. The idea was brilliant. Smaller front tires meant less aerodynamic drag, while 4 contact patches up front meant more grip in corners and better braking. The car actually worked. Jody Scheckter drove it to victory at the 1976 Swedish Grand Prix, and the entire paddock was stunned. Other teams started experimenting too. Williams built the FW08B with 4 wheels at the rear, and it was devastatingly quick in testing. But the concept had a fatal flaw: tire development. Goodyear eventually stopped making the custom small tires that the front axles needed. Without proper rubber, the whole idea collapsed. By 1983, the FIA made it official. Formula One cars could only have 4 wheels, no more, no less. The 6-wheeled dream rolled into the history books forever. Number 16. Tire soaking. There was a time in NASCAR when crew members would take their tires back to the hotel room and soak them in chemical solutions overnight. It sounds insane, but it was remarkably common. The chemicals softened the rubber compound, giving the tires more grip on the track surface. It was like giving your car an invisible advantage that nobody could see just by looking at the car. The practice came under intense scrutiny in 1998 when team owner Jack Roush publicly accused Ray Evernham, Jeff Gordon's legendary crew chief, of treating Gordon's tires during his dominant 13-win season. The accusations rocked the NASCAR paddock. Whether or not specific teams were guilty, NASCAR cracked down hard. Today, tires are distributed by Goodyear under strict supervision, and any chemical treatment of the rubber is an automatic and severe penalty. The era of bringing your Goodyears to a hotel bathtub is definitively over. Number 15. Ground effect aerodynamics with sliding skirts. Colin Chapman's Lotus team changed Formula One forever in 1977 with the revolutionary Lotus 78. The car used inverted wing profiles underneath the side pods to create a low-pressure zone that sucked the car down to the track. But the real secret weapon was the sliding skirts, flexible strips along the bottom edges of the side pods that sealed the gap between the car and the ground, preventing air from leaking in and disrupting the low-pressure zone. The downforce was staggering. Cars were suddenly cornering at speeds that circuits were never designed for. By 1980, the technology had spread across the grid, and teams were pushing it to extremes. The cars were run with incredibly stiff suspension to maintain the seal between the skirts and the ground, which meant drivers were being physically pummeled by vibrations. Some were treated for spinal compression after long races. But the terrifying downside was the failure mode. If a skirt failed or lost its seal even momentarily, the car would lose all of its downforce in an instant. There would be no gradual warning, just a sudden, catastrophic loss of grip at enormous speed. The consequences were devastating. Multiple serious accidents and fatalities plagued the early 1980s, including the death of Gilles Villeneuve in 1982. Ground effect with sliding skirts was banned for the 1983 season, replaced by flat-bottom regulations that remain the foundation of Formula One's floor rules to this day. Number 14. Exotic fuel blends and additives. During the turbo era of Formula One in the 1980s, fuel wasn't just gasoline, It was practically a chemical weapon. Teams worked with fuel companies to develop exotic blends that contained toluene, an octane-boosting aromatic hydrocarbon that smelled terrible but worked wonders inside a turbocharged engine. Some blends were so far removed from normal gasoline that they were closer to rocket fuel. These concoctions allowed turbo engines to produce over 1,000 horsepower in qualifying trim from just 1.5 liters of displacement. The gains were enormous, but the fuels were also incredibly toxic. The fumes in the pit lane were dangerous to anyone who breathed them. Rally teams were doing similar things during the Group B era, using high concentrations of toluene to squeeze every last bit of power from their turbo engines. The FIA eventually stepped in, mandating from 1993 onward that Formula One fuel must closely resemble commercially available gasoline. The days of custom-brewed chemical cocktails were over, and the pit lane became a significantly less hazardous place to stand. Number 13. Active suspension. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, active suspension transformed Formula One into something that looked almost effortless for the cars that had it. The system used hydraulic actuators controlled by onboard computers to constantly adjust the car's ride height and suspension stiffness in real time, reading the track surface and reacting to bumps and compressions before the driver even felt them. Springs were essentially replaced by fluid pressure and pure computing power. Lotus was the pioneer, and Ayrton Senna won his first ever Formula One race in an active suspension-equipped Lotus at Monaco in 1987. But Williams perfected the technology with the FW14B in 1992, and Nigel Mansell absolutely dominated that season, winning 10 out of 16 races. The car stayed perfectly flat through every corner while competitors pitched and rolled. Engineers even added a button on the steering wheel that lowered the ride height on straights, reducing drag and boosting top speed. By 1993, the Williams FW15C combined active suspension with traction control and anti-lock brakes to create what many consider the most technologically advanced Formula One car ever built. Alain Prost won the championship with it almost effortlessly. The FIA decided this level of electronic wizardry was taking the sport away from the drivers and toward a pure engineering contest. Active suspension was banned for 1994, a decision that some believe had tragic unintended consequences for car safety that season. The technology now lives on in luxury road cars everywhere, but it remains forbidden on the Formula One grid. Number 12. Nitrous oxide systems. Nitrous oxide has always been illegal in NASCAR, always. But that didn't stop teams from using it, especially during the wild 1970s. The compound works by introducing additional oxygen into the combustion chamber, allowing the engine to burn more fuel and produce significantly more power in short bursts. On a big, naturally aspirated V8, nitrous could add roughly 100 to 150 extra horsepower. Teams would hide small canisters in creative places throughout the car and use them during qualifying laps, when the brief burst of power mattered most. The front row of the 1976 Daytona 500 reportedly looked a bit suspicious because of this. Two notable offenders, A.J. Foyt and Darrell Waltrip, were both caught with nitrous systems. Foyt's canister was found quickly by officials, but Waltrip's crew had hidden theirs inside a modified wedge bar, and it took considerable effort for inspectors to locate it. When NASCAR founder Bill France threatened to cut the car apart, the crew chief finally revealed the hiding spot. Waltrip later famously said that not cheating made you look like an idiot. Number 11. Movable aerodynamic devices, high-mounted wings. In the late 1960s, Formula One teams discovered wings. Not small, carefully regulated appendages like today, but enormous structures mounted on tall stalks directly to the suspension uprights. These wings sat high in the clean airstream and pushed massive amounts of downforce directly through the unsprung mass of the car, bypassing the chassis entirely. The increase in cornering speed was dramatic and immediate, but the structures were fragile. At the 1969 Spanish Grand Prix, both Lotus drivers experienced catastrophic wing failures at high speed. Graham Hill's car was launched into the air, and Jochen Rindt suffered a similar failure. Both crashes could easily have been fatal. The FIA acted swiftly, banning wings mounted to unsprung parts of the car partway through the 1969 season, effective from the Monaco Grand Prix onward. All practice times were annulled. Wings were not eliminated entirely, but had to be firmly attached to the chassis and kept below a certain height. This mid-season rule change set the precedent for how aerodynamic devices would be regulated for the next 50 years. Number 10. The double brake pedal. In 1997, McLaren introduced one of the most cleverly sneaky innovations in Formula One history: a second brake pedal. The standard brake pedal worked all four wheels as normal, but the extra pedal controlled only the rear brakes. This allowed drivers to brake one side of the rear axle entering a corner, effectively rotating the car and eliminating understeer. It was a mechanical form of torque vectoring, decades before the concept became mainstream. The system gave McLaren a significant advantage in slow and medium-speed corners where understeer was the enemy. Other teams quickly figured out what was going on and protested. The FIA ruled that while the system was technically legal under existing regulations, it would be banned going forward because it effectively constituted a traction control system by another name. The double brake pedal disappeared after a single season, remembered as one of Formula One's most ingenious loopholes. McLaren had found a mechanical solution to a problem that other teams were trying to solve with illegal electronics. Number 9. Smokey Yunick's oversized fuel lines. Henry Smokey. Yunick is the patron saint of NASCAR cheating, and his fuel line trick might be his masterpiece. NASCAR strictly regulated fuel cell capacity, so every team's car was supposed to carry the same amount of fuel. Yunick's solution was elegant. He replaced the standard fuel line with an enormous coiled tube, roughly the diameter of a sewer pipe, that snaked through the car. This single fuel line could hold an extra 5 gallons of fuel all on its own. When inspectors checked the fuel cell, the capacity was exactly legal. Nobody thought to measure how much fuel was sitting in the line connecting the tank to the engine. Yunick pulled stunts like this throughout his career. He once reportedly inflated a basketball inside the fuel cell before inspection, so when officials filled it to check capacity, everything looked perfect. After inspection, the crew deflated the ball, and the tank could hold extra fuel. Angry officials once pulled one of his cars completely apart and told him to fix 9 things. He said it should be 10 and somehow still drove the car away. Yunick's era of creative rule-bending is long gone. Modern NASCAR inspects every conceivable element of the car. Number 8. Traction control. Traction control uses electronic sensors to detect wheel spin and automatically reduces engine power or applies braking to prevent the tires from losing grip. In the early 1990s, it was perfectly legal in Formula One, and teams used it aggressively. The technology was transformative. Drivers could mash the throttle coming out of corners, and the electronics would manage the power delivery for them. It made fast cars faster and reduced the skill gap between drivers. The FIA banned traction control at the end of 1993 as part of a sweeping elimination of electronic driver aids. They wanted to put the emphasis back on the drivers, not the software. But the ban came with a massive controversy. In 1994, the Benetton team was accused of running traction control on Michael Schumacher's car. An FIA investigation found suspicious software in the car's electronics, though the team insisted it was inactive code. The suspicion was never fully resolved. Traction control briefly returned to Formula One between 2001 and 2008, before being permanently outlawed. Today, managing wheel spin with nothing but throttle sensitivity and skill is considered fundamental to being an elite driver. Number 7. The Chaparral 2J Sucker Car. Before the Brabham fan car, there was the original. The Chaparral 2J was built by legendary Texan engineer Jim Hall for the Can-Am Series in 1970, and it was arguably the most revolutionary racing car of its decade. The concept was radical. Two powerful fans driven by a separate auxiliary snowmobile engine sucked air from underneath the vehicle, independent of the main racing engine. Flexible Lexan plastic skirts around the entire perimeter of the car sealed the gap between the chassis and the ground, creating a near vacuum beneath the vehicle. The downforce was phenomenal, and unlike conventional aerodynamics, it worked regardless of the car's speed. The car could generate massive grip sitting still in the pit lane. It didn't need velocity to create downforce, which meant it was faster out of corners than anything else on the grid before it had even reached full speed. The Chaparral 2J dominated the 1970 Can-Am season, and competitors were beside themselves. They banded together and protested furiously, arguing that the fans constituted illegal, movable aerodynamic devices. The governing body eventually agreed, and the car was banned. But its influence echoed through the decades. Gordon Murray has openly acknowledged that the Chaparral 2J was the direct inspiration for his Brabham fan car 8 years later. Hall's creation proved that you didn't need massive wings to generate downforce, and that idea was truly revolutionary for the future of racing engineering. Number 6. Oversized and modified engines. In the early decades of NASCAR, engine regulations existed, but enforcing them was another matter entirely. The rules said 358 cubic inches maximum displacement. What the engines actually measured was often a different story. The most infamous example came in 1983 at Charlotte Motor Speedway when Richard Petty won the Miller High Life 500. During post-race inspection, officials discovered that Petty's engine displaced 381.983 cubic inches, nearly 24 cubic inches, over the limit. To make matters worse, his crew had also bolted left-side tires on the right side of the car during the final pit stop. Petty was fined and docked 104 points, but astonishingly, the victory stood. The cheating extended beyond displacement. Teams used creative techniques like adding wax to cylinder walls that would melt during the race, temporarily expanding the displacement beyond what a cold engine measurement would reveal. Modern NASCAR uses laser scanning and digital measurement tools that make these tricks essentially impossible. But for decades, the engine rule was more of a suggestion than a law. Number 5. The F-duct. In 2010, McLaren arrived at the Formula One season with a device so clever it took rival teams months to figure out. The F-duct was a system of air channels running through the car. A small inlet near the front of the car drew in air and channeled it through the chassis to the rear wing. By covering or uncovering a vent inside the cockpit with their knee, the driver could redirect the airflow to stall the rear wing, dramatically reducing drag on the straights. When they released their knee, full downforce returned for the corners. The speed advantage on long straights was substantial. Other teams scrambled to copy the concept, with varying degrees of success and safety. Some implementations required drivers to take a hand off the steering wheel to operate the system, which was obviously terrifying at 200 miles per hour. The FIA banned the F-duct for the 2011 season, citing that no driver movement should deliberately affect the aerodynamics of the car. The ban directly led to the creation of the drag reduction system, or DRS, which achieved the same rear wing stalling effect, but through a regulated push-button mechanism available to all teams equally. Number 4. Continuously variable transmissions. In the early 1990s, Williams developed a continuously variable transmission, or CVT, for Formula One, and it might have been the single biggest performance leap that never saw the light of day. Instead of fixed gear ratios, a CVT uses a system of belts and cones that allows the engine to stay at its optimal power-producing RPM at all times, regardless of the car's actual speed. Think about that for a moment. No gear changes, no momentary loss of power between shifts, no compromise between low-speed torque and high-speed power. The engine sits permanently at its peak output, delivering maximum force to the wheels every single second of every lap. Williams tested the system extensively and found it was devastatingly fast. The CVT eliminated the fraction of a second lost during each gear shift, and over an entire lap with dozens of shifts, those fractions added up to seconds. The performance advantage was staggering, potentially worth multiple seconds per lap. The FIA saw the writing on the wall and banned CVTs before they ever raced in a Grand Prix. The rules were rewritten to mandate a minimum number of gear ratios, effectively killing the concept entirely. It remains one of the very few innovations in Formula One history that was outlawed before it could even compete in a single race. The governing body recognized that if CVTs were allowed, every team would be forced to develop one at enormous expense, and the technology would fundamentally change the nature and sound of the cars. It remains one of the great what-if stories of motorsport. Number 3, dual-axis steering. In 2020, Mercedes arrived at pre-season testing and jaws hit the floor. Onboard cameras showed Lewis Hamilton and Valtteri Bottas pulling their steering wheels toward them and pushing them away, in addition to the normal left-right turning motion. This was DAS, or dual-axis steering. The system allowed drivers to change the toe angle of the front wheels on the fly. Pulling the wheel set the front wheels to zero toe or slight toe in, which reduced drag and tire wear on the straights. Pushing it back created toe out, which improved cornering grip. The system also helped manage tire temperatures, which was critical during safety car periods when tires cool down. Mercedes had found a loophole in the regulations that nobody else had even considered. The FIA ruled it legal for the 2020 season, but immediately moved to outlaw it from 2021 onward. Other teams, faced with the expense and complexity of developing their own systems mid-season, simply chose to wait out the ban. DAS is a perfect example of modern Formula One innovation, brilliant, expensive, and banned within 12 months. Number 2, the mass damper. Renault's tuned mass damper might be the most controversial ban in modern Formula One. The device was breathtakingly simple, a weight held inside a tube with springs at either end, the same principle used in skyscrapers to counteract wind sway. Renault installed it in their 2005 car, placing a sprung 10-kilogram mass in the nose that oscillated against the car's natural vibrations. The effect was remarkable. It smoothed out the car's aerodynamic behavior, giving drivers Fernando Alonso and Giancarlo Fisichella significantly more confidence and consistency through corners. The car essentially became more predictable and better at maintaining its optimal aerodynamic balance. Other teams soon followed suit with their own versions. The FIA initially allowed the device, but then reversed course during the 2006 season, declaring the mass damper an illegal movable aerodynamic device. This ruling infuriated engineers across the paddock because the device wasn't even in the airflow. It affected aerodynamics indirectly by stabilizing the chassis, but the same could be said about suspension components that were perfectly legal. Many believe the ban was politically motivated, and it remains one of the most debated regulatory decisions in the sport's history. Number 1, the double diffuser. And at number 1, we have the modification that didn't just bend the rules but exposed just how much room there was between the lines. When Formula One introduced sweeping new aerodynamic regulations for 2009, the goal was to reduce downforce and improve overtaking. Most teams designed their cars according to the spirit of those regulations. Braun GP, Toyota, and Williams did not. They found a loophole. By creating channels in the floor of the car that fed air up through holes in the rear diffuser, they could dramatically increase the diffuser's effective surface area without exceeding the dimensions stated in the technical regulations. Braun GP, the former Honda team that had been rescued by Ross Braun at the last minute, absolutely maximized the concept. The result was one of the most remarkable seasons in motorsport history. Jenson Button won 6 of the first 7 races and eventually captured the World Championship. Competing teams protested furiously, but the FIA declared the design legal under the existing rules. Every other team then frantically developed their own double diffusers, but Braun's head start was insurmountable. The loophole was closed for 2011 with new, more specific floor regulations. The double diffuser represents everything that makes motorsport engineering fascinating. It wasn't about raw power or exotic materials. It was about reading the rulebook more carefully than everyone else and finding the one paragraph that allowed you to build something nobody expected. That's the purest form of racing innovation, and that's why it sits at the top of this list. And there you have it, 20 racing modifications that were completely normal back in the day, but would get you thrown out of the paddock today. From leaded fuel and fan cars to mass dampers and double diffusers, motorsport has always been a war between the engineers who push boundaries and the rule makers who try to keep up. Which one blew your mind the most? And which banned modification do you wish they'd bring back? Let us know in the comment section below. If you enjoyed this deep dive into racing's wildest innovations, go ahead and hit that like button, subscribe, and tap the notification bell so you don't miss the next one. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.